The blood splattered across the floorboards as Della Langley crumpled to her knees, the bitter taste of iron filling her mouth as her husband's fist connected with her jaw for the third time that evening. The year was 1876, and in the unforgiving plains of the Nebraska Territory, a woman's worth was often measured by the children she bore, and after 5 years of marriage, Della's empty cradle had become her greatest shame. "Useless!" Edgar Langley bellowed, his face contorted with drunken rage as he towered over his wife's trembling form. "5 years wasted on a barren woman! What good are you to me if you can't even give me a son?" Della didn't answer, knowing from experience that any response would only fuel his anger. At 25, the bright-eyed girl who had once dreamed of a loving family had been replaced by a woman who flinched at sudden movements and wore high-necked dresses to hide the bruises, even in the summer heat. "My pa warned me about you," Edgar continued, pacing the worn wooden floor of their small farmhouse, stopping occasionally to take another swig from his whiskey bottle. "Said there was something wrong with a woman whose mama died in childbirth. Said it might run in the blood." He spat on the floor beside her. "Should have listened." Through her swollen eye, Della watched her husband grab his hat from the hook by the door. "I'm heading to town. Don't expect me back tonight." The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound she had heard all day. When she was certain he was gone, Della pulled herself to her feet, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. She caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the wash basin, her honey-blonde hair matted with blood, her left eye swollen shut, her lips split and already beginning to purple. She barely recognized herself anymore. As she dampened a cloth to clean her wounds, a resolve hardened within her. Edgar would kill her one day. She was certain of it. And with each passing month that her womb remained empty, his rage grew. She couldn't stay. Not anymore. Working quickly despite her injuries, Della gathered what few possessions she could claim as truly hers: a small leather-bound journal from her father, a silver hairpin that had belonged to her mother, a few dresses, and the meager savings she'd managed to hide away over the years, sewn into the lining of her winter shawl. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She paused at the door, looking back at the home that had become her prison. 5 years of her life, wasted on a man who saw her as nothing more than a breeding mare. With a deep breath that sent pain shooting through her bruised ribs, Della stepped out into the cool autumn night, with no destination in mind except away. The journey west was fraught with danger for a lone woman with little money and even less protection. Della traveled mostly by night, hitching rides on farmers' wagons when she could, walking when she couldn't, always careful to keep her bruised face hidden beneath the brim of a worn bonnet she'd purchased in the first town she passed through. By the time she reached Wyoming Territory, winter was setting in, and her meager funds had dwindled to almost nothing. Desperation led her to a small mining town called Silverpine, nestled in the shadow of the mountains. The town's single street was lined with the usual establishments: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a boarding house that advertised rooms for rent. It was at this boarding house, run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Holloway, that Della found temporary shelter, exchanging work for lodging. Her bruises had faded, but the wariness in her eyes remained. "I don't ask questions about a person's past," Mrs. Holloway had said when Della applied for the position, her shrewd eyes taking in Della's thin frame and the way she startled at loud noises. "But I won't abide trouble being brought to my door. Whatever you're running from, make sure it stays behind you." Della had nodded gratefully, and for 3 weeks, she had scrubbed floors, changed linens, and cooked meals for the boarding house residents, mostly miners and the occasional traveling salesman. It wasn't freedom, not really, but it was a far cry from the life she had left behind. On a particularly bitter December morning, as Della was hanging laundry to dry in the small yard behind the boarding house, she noticed a commotion in the street. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, their horses' hooves kicking up dust despite the recent snowfall. They were a rough-looking bunch, sun-weathered and trail-worn, but one man in particular caught her eye. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders wrapped in a worn leather duster, a battered hat pulled low over his brow. Unlike his companions who headed straight for the saloon, this cowboy dismounted at the general store, leading his dappled gray stallion by the reins. Della ducked her head, not wanting to be caught staring, but she couldn't help stealing glances as the man tied his horse to the hitching post. There was something in the way he moved, a quiet confidence that spoke of strength, without the need to display it. She was so distracted by her observations that she didn't notice Mrs. Holloway approaching until the older woman spoke directly behind her. "Samuel Eckhart," Mrs. Holloway said, making Della jump and drop the damp sheet she was hanging. "Foreman at the Triple R Ranch, about 20 miles west of here." "I wasn't," Della began, but Mrs. Holloway waved her protest away. "Every unmarried woman in this town has set her cap for that man at one time or another," the widow continued, helping Della retrieve the fallen sheet. "But he keeps to himself, that one. Comes to town once a month for supplies, never stays longer than necessary." Della felt a flush creep up her neck. "I was merely observing the newcomers, for safety's sake." Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "Well, for safety's sake, you should know that Samuel Eckhart is one of the few decent men in these parts. Now finish hanging these sheets. There's stew to be made for supper." Later that evening, as Della served the boarding house residents their meal, she was startled to find Samuel Eckhart among them. He sat quietly at the end of the table, his hat placed respectfully beside his plate, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Mrs. Holloway was kind enough to offer me a room for the night," he explained, when he caught Della's surprised look. His voice was deep but gentle, with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "Storm's coming in, and I'd rather not risk the ride back to the ranch in the dark." "Of course," Della murmured, serving him a bowl of stew with hands that suddenly seemed clumsy. "We have plenty of room." Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of his presence, though he spoke little, answering the other boarders' questions about conditions on the trail with polite brevity. It was only when the conversation turned to recent raids on nearby homesteads that he became more animated. "The Blackwell gang," one of the miners said, shaking his head grimly. "Heard they hit the Thompson place last week. Took everything of value and left the family tied up in their barn." "Someone ought to do something about them outlaws," another added. "Sheriff's useless as teats on a bull." Samuel set down his spoon, his expression hardening. "The Thompsons are good people. Mrs. Thompson taught my sister to read before she passed." His jaw tightened. "If I see any of Blackwell's men near the Triple R, they'll regret it." There was something in his tone that sent a shiver down Della's spine. Not fear, exactly, but a recognition of the quiet danger that resided within this man, normally kept leashed but ready to be unleashed if necessary. After supper, as Della cleared the dishes, she found Samuel lingering, offering to help. "That's not necessary, Mr. Eckhart," she said, startled by the gesture. In her experience, men didn't concern themselves with women's work. "My ma raised me better than to sit idle while a lady works," he replied simply, gathering plates with surprising deftness. "And it's Sam, if you don't mind." As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Della found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. There was something comforting about his steady movements and the respectful distance he maintained. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you're new to Silverpine," Sam said after a few minutes of companionable silence. "Not many folks choose to settle here, especially with winter coming on." Della tensed, her hands stilling in the dishwater. "I go where work takes me," she replied carefully. Sam nodded, not pressing further. "It's a hard country for anyone on their own," He handed her the last plate. "But I've found good people make even the hardest places bearable." Their fingers brushed as she took the plate, and Della pulled back quickly, nearly dropping the dish. Sam pretended not to notice, drying his hands on a nearby towel. "Thank you for the fine meal, Miss Langley," he said, tipping his head slightly. "I'll be heading out at first light." Della nodded, unable to articulate why his imminent departure left her feeling oddly disappointed. "Safe travels, Mr. Eckhart, Sam." He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "And to you, Della." As she watched him leave the kitchen, Della realized it was the first time in months that she'd heard her given name spoken with kindness. The predicted storm arrived with a vengeance overnight, blanketing Silver Pine in heavy snow and howling winds that rattled the boarding house windows. By morning, drifts had piled high against the doors, and it was clear that no one would be traveling that day. Sam took the delay in stride, spending the morning helping the other male boarders clear paths to the necessary outbuildings while Della and Mrs. Holloway prepared a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and salt pork. "Might be stuck here for a few days," Mrs. Holloway remarked, as she watched the men working through the frosted window. "Good thing we're well stocked on provisions." Della nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of Sam's extended stay. She told herself it was foolish to feel anything for a man she barely knew, especially when the memory of Edgar's cruelty was still so fresh. Yet as the day progressed, she found herself drawn to Sam's quiet presence. He wasn't like other men she'd known. He spoke little but listened intently. He offered help without being asked. And most importantly, there was no hint of the explosive anger that had characterized her relationship with Edgar. That evening, after the other boarders had retired to their rooms, Della found Sam sitting alone by the fire in the small common room, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly, standing in the doorway with her mending basket. Sam looked up, surprise flashing across his features before he smiled and gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, the soft scrape of Sam's knife against wood, and the whisper of Della's needle through fabric. "What are you making?" Della finally asked, nodding toward the piece in his hands. Sam turned the wood, examining it critically. "Thought it might be a horse, but it's looking more like a misshapen cow at the moment." His self-deprecating smile made her laugh softly. "It's good to hear you laugh," he said quietly. "When I first saw you hanging laundry yesterday, you looked haunted." Della's hands stilled, her eyes fixed on the shirt she was mending. "We all have our ghosts, I suppose." Sam nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That we do." He set aside his carving. "I lost my wife and infant son to fever 3 years ago. There are days when the memory is as sharp as if it happened yesterday." Della looked up, surprised by his candor. I'm sorry for your loss." "As am I for whatever brought that sadness to your eyes," he replied gently. Something in his gaze, the genuine empathy, the lack of judgment made Della want to confide in him, despite her usual caution. "I left my husband," she said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "In Nebraska. She faltered, unsure how to continue. "You don't need to explain," Sam said quietly. "Some men don't deserve the women they marry." Della swallowed hard, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric in her lap. "He blamed me because we had no children, said I was barren, defective." She couldn't bring herself to mention the beatings, but from the way Sam's jaw tightened, she suspected he understood what remained unspoken. "A man who measures a woman's worth by whether she bears children understands nothing about true value," Sam said, his voice low but intense. "My Ruth. She gave me a son, yes, but I loved her long before that, and I would have loved her just the same had we remained childless." Tears pricked at Della's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Your wife was fortunate to have such a husband. I was the fortunate one, Sam corrected gently. And your husband was a fool who didn't recognize the treasure he had. Before Della could respond, Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, her expression pinched with concern. There's someone at the door asking after a woman matching your description, Della. Says he's looking for his wife. Della's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. How had Edgar found her so quickly? Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, the mending slipping from her fingers to the floor. Sam was on his feet immediately, his earlier gentleness replaced by alert tension. Stay here, he told Della, his voice leaving no room for argument. To Mrs. Holloway he added, Don't tell him she's here until I've had a word with our visitor. Della could only nod numbly as Sam strode from the room, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. She heard the murmur of male voices from the entryway, too low to distinguish words, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of hostility. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only minutes, Sam returned, his expression grave. It's not safe for you here anymore. Your husband's been tracking you town by town. Offered the man at the door a reward for information. A sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob escaped Della's throat. What am I going to do? I have nowhere else to go. Sam knelt before her chair, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. I've sent him on a false trail toward Cheyenne, but that won't hold him for long. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. Come with me to the Triple R. It's remote, well defended, and no one would think to look for you there. I can't impose. It's not an imposition, Sam interrupted firmly. The ranch needs a cook now that Mrs. Peabody's gone to live with her daughter. You'd earn your keep, same as here. But you'd be safe. He squeezed her hands gently. I won't let him hurt you again, Della. I promise you that. Looking into his earnest eyes, Della felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. It was reckless, perhaps, to trust a man she'd known for barely 2 days. But something in her heart told her that Samuel Eckhart was different from any man she'd ever known. When do we leave? She whispered. First light, Sam replied. Pack only what you can carry easily. I'll take care of the rest. True to his word, Sam had everything prepared by dawn. The storm had passed, leaving a crystalline landscape of untouched snow under a clear blue sky. Despite the beauty, Della felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach as Sam helped her mount behind him on his gray stallion. Hold tight, he instructed as she hesitantly placed her hands at his waist. It's a long ride, and the trail won't be easy after the storm. Mrs. Holloway stood in the doorway of the boarding house, her usual stern expression softened with concern. Be careful, child, she called to Della, and remember what I said about leaving trouble behind. Della nodded, grateful for the older woman's discretion. She had paid for her room through the end of the month, ensuring Mrs. Holloway wouldn't suffer financially for her abrupt departure. As they rode out of Silver Pine, Della couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Edgar's hulking figure pursuing them. Instead, all she saw was the town growing smaller in the distance, eventually disappearing around a bend in the trail. The journey to the Triple R Ranch took most of the day, with Sam choosing a circuitous route through the mountains rather than the more direct path across the open plains. Less chance of being spotted this way, he explained, as they navigated narrow trails between towering pines. By the time the ranch came into view, the winter sun was already beginning its early descent. Della, stiff and sore from the long ride, couldn't help but be impressed by the sight. Nestled in a protected valley with mountains rising on 3 sides, the Triple R was larger than she had imagined. A sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, a large barn, and corrals containing horses even in the winter months. It's beautiful, she murmured. Been in the Eckhart family for 2 generations, Sam replied, a note of pride in his voice. My father started with nothing but 100 acres and a dream. Now we run over 5,000 head of cattle on 30,000 acres. As they approached, several ranch hands emerged from the barn, their expressions curious as they noted Della seated behind their boss. "Boys," Sam greeted them as he reined in his horse. "This is Miss Della Langley. She'll be taking over as cook in Mrs. Peabody's place." The simple explanation seemed to satisfy the men, who tipped their hats respectfully to Della. A tall, lanky young man stepped forward to take the reins as Sam dismounted. "Everything quiet while I was gone, Daniel?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Eckhart," the young man replied. "Though there was a rider yesterday asking about a woman. Said he was looking for his wife." Daniel's eyes flicked briefly to Della, who felt her heart freeze in her chest. "Told him we hadn't seen any new faces as you instructed before you left." Sam's expression remained neutral, but Della could feel the tension in his shoulders as he helped her down from the horse. "Good man. Make sure everyone knows if that rider or anyone asking similar questions returns. They're to be sent on their way. Firmly, if necessary." Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Yes, sir." Inside the main house, Della was surprised by the comfortable, if simple, furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the central room, with well-worn leather chairs and a solid oak table that could easily seat a dozen men. Bookcases lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested Sam was more well-read than the average rancher. "It's not fancy," Sam said, watching her take in her surroundings. "But it's home." "It's wonderful," Della replied honestly, already feeling more at ease than she had in years. Sam showed her to a small but clean room off the kitchen. "Was Mrs. Peabody's. She lived here for 15 years before her rheumatism got too bad." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. "I know it's all happened fast, and you might be having second thoughts. If you want to leave once the weather warms up, I'll understand. But you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay." Della turned to face him, overwhelmed by his kindness. "Thank you, Sam, for everything." He smiled, the expression warming his weathered features. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you can meet the rest of the ranch hands properly." As he turned to leave, Della called after him. "Sam?" When he paused, looking back, she asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me." Sam considered her question seriously before answering. "When Ruth died, I was in a dark place. Might have stayed there if not for good people who pulled me back into the light." His eyes held hers steadily. "Sometimes we all need someone to believe in us, when we've forgotten how to believe in ourselves." With that, he bid her good night, leaving Della to ponder his words as she prepared for bed in her new surroundings. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment for Della. The rhythm of ranch life was different from anything she had known before, but she embraced the challenge, determined to prove her worth. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her mornings baking bread and planning meals, her afternoons cleaning and mending, and her evenings preparing hearty suppers for hungry men who showed their appreciation by cleaning their plates and offering shy compliments. To her surprise, the ranch hands a diverse group of men ranging from grizzled veterans of the cattle trails to young cowboys on their first job away from home, treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced. There were no lewd comments or unwelcome advances, a fact she attributed to Sam's quiet but firm leadership. Sam himself was often absent during the days, riding out with his men to check on cattle wintering in sheltered valleys, repair fences damaged by snow, and keep watch for predators both animal and human. But in the evenings, he would often linger after the other men had retired to the bunkhouse, sometimes helping Della with the dishes, other times simply sitting by the fire, occasionally reading aloud from one of his books. These quiet moments became precious to Della, a time when she could feel the rigid guard she had maintained for so long begin to lower. Sam never pressed her for details about her past, but his patient presence made it easier for her to share pieces of her story, her childhood on a small farm in Ohio, her father's death when she was 16, her hasty marriage to Edgar at 20, more out of financial necessity than love. In turn, Sam spoke of his own life, his youth on the ranch, his brief time at a college back east where he had studied literature and animal husbandry, his courtship of Ruth, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and the devastating loss of both her and their infant son to a fever that swept through the area 3 years prior. "I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again after they died," he confessed one evening in late January, as they sat before the fire. "I just went through the motions of living. The ranch kept me busy, gave me purpose, but there was no joy in it." His eyes, reflecting the dancing flames, held a distant sadness. "It's only recently that I've started to feel like myself again." Della understood completely. She too had been going through the motions, first in her loveless marriage, and then in her desperate flight from it. It was only here, in this unexpected sanctuary, that she had begun to rediscover parts of herself she had thought lost forever. February brought a brief thaw, turning the ranch yard into a muddy expanse that prompted Sam to delay the routine supply run to town. But by mid-month, a hard freeze had firmed the ground enough for travel, and Sam announced his intention to ride into Silverpine the following day. "Is there anything particular you need?" he asked Della as they sat at the kitchen table that evening, going over the supply list. Della hesitated. She had been making do with the few dresses she had brought with her, carefully washing and mending them as needed, but they were showing significant wear. "Some fabric, perhaps, if it's not too dear. And thread." Sam nodded, adding the items to his list without comment. Then, almost casually, he asked, "Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a day." Della's initial instinct was to refuse. Silverpine meant potential danger, the possibility of Edgar having returned, or having left word about his missing wife. But the thought of a day in Sam's company, away from the routine of the ranch, was tempting. "Do you think it's safe?" she asked, voicing her concern. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't," Sam replied seriously. "It's been nearly 2 months. Most likely your husband has moved on to search elsewhere." He set down his pencil. "But the choice is yours, Della. I won't press you." The fact that he left the decision entirely to her, respecting her judgment rather than imposing his own, decided the matter. "I'd like to come," she said with a small smile. "Thank you." They set out early the next morning, riding double on Sam's gray stallion. The journey seemed shorter than Della remembered, perhaps because this time she was riding towards something rather than away from it, or perhaps because she had grown more comfortable with Sam's solid presence before her. Silverpine appeared unchanged as they rode into town, the same dusty main street now muddy with melting snow, the same businesses lining either side. A few curious glances were cast their way, but most townsfolk were too busy with their own affairs to pay much attention to the rancher and his companion. Their first stop was the general store, where Sam helped Della select several yards of sturdy cotton in practical colors, along with thread, needles, and other notions. The proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, was polite, but not overly familiar, treating Della with the respect due to a lady under the protection of a man like Samuel Eckhart. It was only as they were preparing to leave the store that Della noticed the wanted poster tacked to the community board near the door. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the crude likeness of Edgar Langley, alongside a description that identified him as wanted for the murder of a saloon girl in Cheyenne. Sam, noticing her sudden pallor, followed her gaze to the poster. His expression hardened as he read the details. Then he gently guided her outside, away from curious eyes. "He killed someone," Della whispered, her voice shaking. "Because of me. Because I ran." "No," Sam said firmly, his hands steady on her shoulders. You are not responsible for his actions. Never think that. His eyes searched hers, making sure his words were getting through. This man was violent long before you left him, Della. You did the right thing by escaping when you did. She nodded, trying to believe him, but the guilt weighed heavily. What if he comes to the ranch? What if he hurts you, or one of the hands because of me? Edgar Langley is a wanted man now. He'll be more concerned with avoiding the law than finding you. Sam's voice was confident, reassuring. And if he does show his face at the Triple R, he'll find 20 men who won't take kindly to a man who beats women. His conviction steadied her, and Della took a deep breath, pushing down her fear. Should we head back to the ranch now? Sam studied her face. Only if you want to. We could still visit Mrs. Holloway, let her know you're well. She was concerned about you. The thought of seeing the kind widow again appealed to Della. I'd like that. If you think it's safe. I do, Sam assured her. And afterward, perhaps we might have a meal at the hotel dining room? They serve a decent roast beef on Thursdays. The invitation, casual as it was, carried an undercurrent that made Della's heart beat faster. This wasn't merely a practical stop during a supply run. This was beginning to feel like a courtship. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After Edgar, she had sworn never to give another man power over her life. Yet Sam had never shown any sign of the controlling behavior or quick temper that had characterized her husband. Instead, he had been unfailingly respectful, kind, and patient. I'd like that very much, she finally replied, rewarded by the warm smile that lit Sam's features. Their visit to the boarding house was brief, but pleasant, with Mrs. Holloway expressing genuine relief at seeing Della safe and well. The older woman's shrewd eyes missed nothing, particularly the way Sam hovered protectively near Della and the subtle glances they exchanged. "You found yourself a good man there," Mrs. Holloway murmured to Della as they said their goodbyes. "Don't let fear of the past rob you of a chance at happiness." Dinner at the hotel was a simple affair by some standards, but to Della it felt like a luxury. The dining room was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and actual silverware instead of the utilitarian implements used at the ranch. Sam, she noticed, had an easy confidence in these surroundings, neither overly formal nor embarrassingly rough in his manners. They were halfway through their meal when the dining room door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a man whose appearance made Della's blood freeze in her veins. It wasn't Edgar, but she recognized him immediately as one of her husband's drinking companions from Nebraska, a man named Harlow who had more than once leered at her when Edgar wasn't looking. Sam, noting her sudden tension, followed her gaze. "Someone you know?" he asked quietly. "A friend of my husband's," Della whispered, her appetite vanishing. "From Nebraska." Sam nodded once, his expression giving nothing away, as the man took a seat at a table across the room. "Finish your coffee calmly," he instructed in a low voice. "Then we'll leave. Act natural." Della forced herself to raise her cup to her lips, though the coffee now tasted like ashes. She kept her face turned slightly away from Harlow's table, praying he wouldn't recognize her. Her prayer went unanswered. Just as they were preparing to leave, Harlow's voice rang out across the dining room. "Well, if it ain't Edgar Langley's runaway wife." The man stood, pointing an accusing finger at Della. "Been looking for you, Mrs. Langley. Your husband's mighty anxious to have you back home where you belong." Every head in the dining room turned toward them. Della felt herself begin to tremble, the old fear washing over her like a wave. Sam rose slowly to his feet, his movements deliberate as he positioned himself between Della and Harlow. "I believe you're mistaken, sir," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "This lady is under my protection, and her name is not Langley." Harlow snorted, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Protection, is it? That what they're calling it these days when a man takes another man's wife?" He took a step forward. Edgar's offering $100 to anyone who brings her back. Think I'll collect? I suggest you reconsider, Sam replied, still outwardly calm, though Della could see the tension in his shoulders. This lady is not returning to a man who beat her. Not today, not ever. A murmur ran through the dining room at Sam's words. Domestic disputes were common enough, but few men spoke so openly about such matters, particularly in defense of a woman. Harlow's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Ain't your business, mister. A man's got a right to discipline his wife as he sees fit. In a move so swift Della barely saw it happen, Sam's hand closed around Harlow's wrist, preventing him from drawing his weapon. Not in my presence. He doesn't. Sam's voice was low, dangerous. Now, you have two choices. You can walk out that door and forget you ever saw this lady, or you can try to draw on me and see how that ends for you. For a tense moment, the entire dining room held its breath. Then Harlow's gaze slid to the star pinned to the lapel of the man seated at the table nearest the door, the town sheriff, who had been quietly observing the confrontation. This ain't over, Harlow growled, jerking his hand free from Sam's grip. But he backed toward the door, unwilling to risk a confrontation with both Sam and the law. Once Harlow had departed, Sam turned to Della, his expression gentle despite the steel that had been in his voice moments before. We should head back to the ranch. It's not safe for you here anymore. Della nodded numbly, her legs unsteady as she rose from her chair. The other diners were still staring, some with disapproval, others with curiosity or sympathy. The sheriff approached as Sam was helping Della with her coat. Trouble, Mr. Eckhart? He asked, his weathered face impassive. Nothing I can't handle, Sheriff Morris, Sam replied evenly. Though I'd be obliged if you'd keep an eye on that fellow. He's associated with Edgar Langley, wanted for murder over in Cheyenne. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. That so? Well, might be I should have a word with him then. He tipped his hat to Della. Madam? The ride back to the ranch was tense and silent. Della, wrapped in Sam's coat against the deepening chill of late afternoon, felt both grateful for his protection and guilty for having brought danger to his doorstep. I'm sorry, she finally said, as the Triple R came into view. I never meant to involve you in my troubles. Sam's hand, warm and reassuring, covered hers where it rested at his waist. You have nothing to apologize for, Della. Nothing. But now Edgar will know where I am. Harlow will tell him. Let him come, Sam said, and there was a quiet certainty in his voice that somehow calmed her racing heart. The Triple R has weathered rustlers, renegade Indians, and blizzards that would freeze a man solid. We can handle one coward who beats women. That night, after the ranch hands had been informed of the potential threat and watches had been posted, Sam found Della sitting alone by the fire in the main room, her eyes fixed unseeingly on the dancing flames. You should get some rest, he said gently, taking the seat opposite her. Della looked up, her expression troubled. How can I sleep, knowing what might be coming? Knowing I've put everyone here at risk? Sam leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Della, I need you to understand something. The men of this ranch, they're not just hired hands, they're family, and family protects its own. His gaze held hers steadily. You became part of this family the moment you stepped through that door. Not one man here would hesitate to stand between you and harm. Tears welled in Della's eyes at his words. Why? Why would they do that for me? Because you've shown them kindness. Because you work as hard as any of them. Sam's voice softened. And because I asked them to. Della searched his face, seeing something there that made her heart skip a beat. Sam, He raised a hand, stopping her. You don't owe me anything, Della. Not explanations, not gratitude, and certainly not feelings you might not be ready for. His eyes, warm in the firelight, held a depth of understanding that took her breath away. I just want you to know that you're safe here, and that when this is over, whatever you decide to stay or to go, I'll respect your choice." The next 2 weeks passed in a state of heightened vigilance at the Triple R ranch. Hands traveled in pairs when working distant sections of the property, and none went unarmed. Della rarely left the main house, and when she did, one of the men was always nearby, ostensibly engaged in some task that just happened to keep them within shouting distance. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, Della found herself growing closer to Sam. Their evening conversations by the fire became a sanctuary, a time when they could set aside the worries of the day and simply enjoy each other's company. Sometimes they would read together, taking turns with passages from Dickens or Twain. Other times they would talk of inconsequential things, childhood memories, favorite foods, dreams of places they'd like to visit. And sometimes they would simply sit in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distant hills. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as March winds rattled the windows, that Sam finally spoke of what had been growing between them. "I find myself thinking of Ruth less often these days," he said softly, his eyes on the fire. "And when I do think of her, the pain isn't as sharp. I used to feel guilty about that, like I was somehow betraying her memory by healing." He looked up, meeting Della's gaze. "But lately I've come to believe she would want me to find happiness again." Della's heart quickened at his words, at the unspoken question in his eyes. "Sam, She hesitated, struggling to articulate the tangle of emotions within her. "After Edgar, I swore I would never again put myself at the mercy of a man. I was so afraid, so angry." She took a deep breath. "But you've shown me that not all men are like him, that there can be gentleness and respect alongside strength." Sam reached across the space between them, his hand open, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. "I would never try to own you, Della. Never try to break your spirit or control your choices. All I want is the chance to walk beside you, to face whatever comes together." Slowly, hesitantly, Della placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of honest work, the strength that had never been used against her, only for her protection. "I think I'd like that," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by the sound of urgent hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Sam was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. "It's Daniel," he reported, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Riding hard, though." They met the young cowboy at the door, his face flushed from the cold and exertion as he dismounted. "Mr. Eckhart," Daniel panted. "Riders coming. 5, maybe 6 men. Armed, about an hour behind me." Sam's expression hardened. "Edgar Langley?" Daniel nodded grimly. "Recognized him from the wanted poster. He's got that fella from the hotel with him, and some other rough types. Spotted them crossing the east pasture while I was checking fence lines." Sam turned to Della, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Go to my room. There's a shotgun in the cabinet by the bed. Barricade yourself in, and don't open the door for anyone but me." For once, Della didn't argue. The thought of facing Edgar again, of being at his mercy, sent ice through her veins. With a quick nod, she hurried to follow Sam's instructions, her hands trembling as she moved a heavy dresser in front of the bedroom door. Through the window, she could see Sam organizing the defense of the ranch. The hands who had been in the bunkhouse emerged with rifles, taking up positions around the main house and outbuildings. Sam himself stood on the porch, seemingly relaxed but with his hand resting near the revolver at his hip. Time seemed to crawl as Della waited, the shotgun heavy in her unaccustomed hands. Finally, she heard the approach of multiple horses, their hoofbeats slowing as they entered the ranch yard. From her vantage point at the window, she could see Edgar dismount, flanked by Harlow and 4 other men she didn't recognize. Her husband looked much as she remembered, a big man with a florid face and small, mean eyes. Seeing him again, Della was struck by how ordinary he appeared, how unremarkable for a man who had caused her so much suffering. Eckhart! Edgar's voice, slurred with what was likely whiskey, carried clearly through the evening air. I know you've got my wife in there. Send her out, and we'll be on our way peaceful-like. Sam remained on the porch, seemingly unimpressed by the group of armed men before him. No one here by that description, Langley. I suggest you and your friends move on. Edgar spat on the ground. Don't play games with me, rancher. Harlow saw her with you in town. That little slut belongs to me, and I'm taking her back. Sam's voice, when he replied, carried an edge that sent a shiver down Della's spine. That little slut, as you call her, is a lady who deserves far better than a coward who beats women to feel like a man. He stepped forward, his posture radiating a controlled aggression that made even Edgar take a step back. And she doesn't belong to anyone, certainly not to you. Edgar's face contorted with rage. You've got no right to interfere between a man and his wife. The law's on my side. Is it? Sam countered coolly. Because from where I'm standing, the law's looking for you for murder in Cheyenne. Wanted posters right there in Silverpine for anyone to see. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Edgar's face before his expression hardened again. That's a lie. And even if it wasn't, you think I care about some two-bit sheriff in a backwater town? He gestured to his companions. We outnumber you, Eckhart. Give me my wife, or we'll burn this place to the ground and take her anyway. Sam smiled then, a cold expression that held no humor. You might want to count again, Langley. As if on cue, the ranch hands who had been positioned around the property stepped into view, each armed with a rifle trained on Edgar and his men. Even from a distance, Della could see the blood drain from her husband's face as he realized they were surrounded. Now, Sam continued, his voice deceptively conversational. Here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to get back on your horses and ride out of here. You're never going to set foot on Triple R land again. And you're never going to bother Della again. His hand moved to rest on the butt of his revolver. Those are your choices if you want to ride out of here alive. For a tense moment, Della thought Edgar might actually be foolish enough to try fighting. His hand twitched toward his gun, and she found herself raising the shotgun, prepared to fire if necessary. But Harlow, apparently possessing more sense than his companion, grabbed Edgar's arm. It ain't worth dying over, Edgar. There'll be other women. The standoff held for several heartbeats more before Edgar's shoulders sagged in defeat. This ain't over, he snarled at Sam. No one takes what's mine. She was never yours to begin with, Sam replied evenly. Now get off my land. Della watched, hardly daring to breathe, as Edgar and his men remounted and rode slowly out of the ranch yard, escorted by 4 of Sam's hands, who would see them well beyond the Triple R's boundaries. Only when they had disappeared from view did she lower the shotgun, her arms aching from the tension of holding it ready. Moments later, there was a gentle knock at the bedroom door. Della, it's me. They're gone. With trembling hands, she moved the dresser and opened the door to find Sam standing there, concern etched on his features. Are you all right? The question undid her. All the fear, the tension, the memories of abuse that Edgar's presence had brought rushing back at all crashed over her like a wave, and before she knew it, she was sobbing into Sam's chest, his strong arms the only thing keeping her upright. It's over, he murmured into her hair, one hand gently stroking her back. You're safe now. I promise you, Della, you're safe. She wasn't sure how long they stood there, Sam offering silent comfort as she purged years of fear and pain. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her breakdown, he simply handed her his handkerchief, his eyes full of understanding rather than judgment. I'm sorry, she began, but Sam shook his head. Don't apologize for feeling, Della, not ever. He brushed a strand of hair from her tear-stained cheek, the gesture achingly tender. "You've been stronger than anyone should have to be. It's all right to let go sometimes." Looking up into his weathered face with its kind eyes and the lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, Della felt something shift within her, a weight lifting, a door closing on the past and another opening to a future she hadn't dared imagine. "Will they come back?" she asked, needing to know. Sam considered her question seriously. "Edgar might be fool enough to try, but I doubt his friends will risk it again. And Edgar Langley alone doesn't worry me." His expression softened. "Besides, Sheriff Morris will be interested to know a wanted murderer was seen in the area. I suspect the law will catch up to your husband before he has a chance to cause more trouble." True to Sam's prediction, word reached them a week later that Edgar Langley had been arrested trying to cross into Colorado Territory. The charges from Cheyenne were serious enough that, according to Sheriff Morris's letter, Langley would likely hang or at least spend many years in prison. The news brought Della a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Edgar had been a shadow hanging over her for so long that his removal from her life permanently this time left her feeling both liberated and somewhat adrift, as if she were suddenly free to chart her own course, but uncertain of the direction. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, bringing with it green grass in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate the Triple R. The cattle were driven to summer grazing lands, new calves wobbled alongside their mothers, and the days grew longer and warmer. Della settled into a rhythm at the ranch, her initial status as a refugee gradually shifting to that of an indispensable member of the household. The ranch hands, once awkward and formal in her presence, now treated her with the easy respect of family. Even Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week to help with laundry and heavier cleaning, remarked on the change in the atmosphere of the main house. "Never seen Mr. Eckhart smile so much," the older woman confided to Della one afternoon as they hung sheets on the line. "Not since before Mrs. Ruth passed. God rest her soul." Della felt a blush creep up her neck at the implication. "Mr. Eckhart has been very kind to me," she replied noncommittally. Mrs. Jenkins snorted softly. "Kind, is it? Girl, that man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." She pinned a pillowcase with more force than necessary. "And unless I miss my guess, you feel the same way about him." Della couldn't deny it. In the months since her arrival at the Triple R, her feelings for Sam had deepened from gratitude to friendship to something much more profound. Their evenings by the fire had become the highlight of her days, and she found herself noticing small details about him, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was amused, but trying not to show it. The gentleness of his hands when he helped her into a saddle for their occasional rides together. The depth of his voice when he read poetry aloud. Yet despite the clear connection between them, Sam had been careful to maintain a respectful distance since that night by the fire when Edgar had threatened the ranch. He was unfailingly kind, attentive even, but he had not again spoken of his feelings or made any overture that could be construed as romantic. Della understood his hesitation. Her life had been in such turmoil, her future so uncertain, that it would have been unfair for Sam to press his suit while she was still coming to terms with her newfound freedom. But now, with Edgar behind bars and spring bringing new beginnings, she found herself wondering if perhaps it was time for her to be the one to speak. The opportunity came on a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sam had been quieter than usual all day, his expression thoughtful as he went about his tasks. "Penny for your thoughts," Della said softly, breaking the companionable silence. Sam turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "I was thinking about change," he replied after a moment, "about how sometimes the things we fear most turn out to be the greatest blessings." Della nodded, understanding. When I left Nebraska, I was terrified. I had no plan, no destination, just the desperate need to get away. She smiled faintly. I never imagined I would find a place like this. People like... She hesitated, then continued. People like you. Sam's gaze intensified, a question in his eyes. Della, He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. These past months, having you here, I've felt alive again, in a way I hadn't since Ruth died. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. I know you've been through hell, and the last thing I want is to rush you or make you feel pressured in any way. But I need you to know how I feel. Della's heart thundered in her chest as Sam continued, his voice low and earnest. I love you, Della, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something entirely new and precious. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I don't expect you to feel the same way. After what you've been through, I would understand if you never wanted to tie yourself to a man again. But if there's any chance... Sam? Della interrupted gently, turning her hand to lace her fingers with his. I do feel the same way. The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. I think I've loved you since that night by the fire when you told me I had a choice about my future. Relief and joy transformed Sam's features, making him look years younger. Then may I court you properly, Della Langley? No rushing, no pressure. Just two people discovering if they might build a life together. Della smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in years. I would like that very much, Samuel Eckhart. Their courtship, though perhaps unusual by conventional standards given that they already lived under the same roof, was conducted with a sweetness and respect that Della had never experienced. Sam was attentive without being possessive, affectionate without being demanding. He brought her wildflowers picked during his rides, read to her in the evenings, and took her on picnics to his favorite spots on the vast ranch property. For her part, Della found herself blossoming in the warmth of his regard. The woman who had once flinched at raised voices now laughed freely, expressed her opinions without fear, and even learned to ride her own horse, a gentle mare Sam selected specifically for her. As summer progressed, their relationship deepened. Their first kiss, shared during a sunset ride to a ridge overlooking the valley, was as tender as it was passionate, igniting a desire in Della that she had never felt with Edgar. In Sam's arms, she discovered that physical affection could be mutual, respectful, and joyous, rather than something to be endured or feared. Yet one shadow remained over their growing happiness. Though they never spoke of it directly, Della knew that her inability to bear children, the barrenness for which Edgar had beaten her, might be a barrier to a future with Sam. He had lost his son, and it would be natural for him to want another chance at fatherhood. The matter came to a head on a warm July evening as they sat on a blanket beside a small creek that ran through the eastern edge of the ranch property. They had been officially courting for nearly 2 months, and the topic of marriage had begun to hover unspoken between them. Sam, Della began hesitantly, plucking at a blade of grass beside the blanket. There's something we need to discuss before things go any further between us. Sam turned to her, his expression open. You can tell me anything, Della. You know that. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Edgar called me Barren because I never conceived in 5 years of marriage. He was probably right. Her voice trembled slightly. If you marry me, there likely won't be children. I know how much you loved your son, and I would understand completely if... Della, Sam interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, surprised to find not disappointment but a depth of emotion that took her breath away. I loved my son, Sam said quietly. I always will. And yes, There was a time when I thought I needed another child to heal that wound. He squeezed her hands gently. But what I've learned, what you've taught me, is that love isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about finding something new to cherish. Tears welled in Della's eyes at his words. But don't you want a family? I have a family, Sam replied simply. The hands who've worked this ranch for years, the neighbors who stand by each other in hard times. His voice softened. And you, Della, you're the family I choose, the one I want to build my life around. A tear slipped down Della's cheek. But, no buts, Sam said firmly. If God blesses us with a child someday, I'll be grateful. But if not, he lifted one hand to gently cup her face. Then I'll be proud to have you still. Just you, Della. You're enough. More than enough. The words, so different from the cruel condemnation she had heard from Edgar, broke something open inside Della. She leaned into Sam's touch, her tears flowing freely now. I love you so much, she whispered. And I love you, Sam replied, drawing her into his arms. Exactly as you are. When he proposed properly a week later, presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, Della's yes was immediate and wholehearted. They were married in August in the small church in Silver Pine, with the ranch hands forming an honor guard and Mrs. Holloway beaming from the front pew. The seasons turned, winter giving way to spring, then summer, then fall, and back to winter again. The Triple R prospered under their joint stewardship, with Della bringing her practical wisdom to bear on everything from managing the household accounts to organizing more efficient systems for the bunkhouse laundry. In their second year of marriage, a range war threatened the peace of the territory, with smaller ranchers like the Triple R caught between cattle barons seeking to expand their empires and homesteaders staking claims on what had traditionally been open range. Sam's fairness and diplomacy, along with Della's quiet strength, helped navigate the Triple R through the conflict without bloodshed, earning them the respect of neighbors on all sides. Their third anniversary found them hosting a harvest festival for the ranch hands and neighboring families, the main house and yard filled with laughter, music, and the delicious scents of Della's cooking. As she watched Sam swing a neighbor's child in a circle, his face alight with joy, Della felt a familiar pang of regret that they had not been blessed with children of their own. Yet the regret was fleeting. Overwhelmed by gratitude for all they did have a partnership built on respect and love, a prosperous ranch, a community that had embraced them both. Later that night, as they lay in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Sam's arms wrapped securely around her, Della voiced a thought that had been growing in her mind. I've been thinking, she said softly, tracing patterns on his chest, about the Holloway orphanage in Cheyenne. Sam's hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused. The one Mrs. Holloway's daughter helps run? Della nodded. Mrs. Holloway mentioned in her last letter that they're overflowing with children. So many orphaned by disease or violence, or simply abandoned because their parents couldn't feed them. She hesitated, then continued. She said there are 2 siblings, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, whose parents died in that influenza outbreak last winter. They've been there for months with no one willing to take them both. Sam was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with a thoughtful expression. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? The Triple R has plenty of room, Della said, her words coming faster now. And those children need a home, a family. We could give them that, Sam. We could be that. A slow smile spread across Sam's features, his eyes warm in the dim light from the banked fire. Della Eckhart, have I told you today how much I love you? Relief and joy filled her chest. You're not opposed to the idea? Opposed? Sam chuckled, pulling her closer. Sweetheart, I think it's perfect. Those children would be blessed to have you as a mother. And you as a father? Della added softly, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. You're a good man, Samuel Eckhart. The best man I've ever known. In the spring of 1880, the Triple R welcomed two new members to its family, Thomas and Sarah Collins, siblings with solemn eyes and wary expressions that gradually gave way to laughter and trust as they settled into their new home. Thomas took to ranch life with enthusiasm, shadowing Sam on his daily rounds and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Sarah, more reserved at first, blossomed under Della's gentle guidance, revealing a quick mind and a talent for drawing that Della encouraged with art supplies, ordered specially from Denver. The children brought a new dimension to the ranch, a vibrancy and purpose that spread to every corner of the property. Even the most taciturn ranch hands found themselves teaching Thomas to whittle, or showing Sarah how to spot a robin's nest without disturbing the birds. On a warm June evening, as Della sat on the porch watching Sam teach Thomas the basics of roping while Sarah sketched the scene with intense concentration, she felt a sense of completion that she had never thought possible. Edgar's cruel words, barren, useless, defective, had lost their power, replaced by the evidence before her eyes. A family built not on blood, but on choice, on love that saw past conventional expectations to the heart of what truly mattered. "Mama, look!" Sarah called, holding up her sketch with pride. "I got Papa's hat just right." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Della replied, her heart full at the sound of those simple words, Mama and Papa, bestowed freely and with love. Later, as the children slept and she and Sam sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Della leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "Happy?" Sam asked, his arm secure around her waist. "Completely," Della replied without hesitation. "You've given me everything I never dared to dream of. Sam's safety, love, family. We've given each other those things," Sam corrected gently. "And we've built something beautiful together, something that will last." As if to punctuate his words, a shooting star streaked across the night sky, brilliant and fleeting. Della closed her eyes, not to make a wish, but in gratitude for wishes already fulfilled for the journey that had brought her from terror to triumph, from a barren existence to a life overflowing with love. In the vast expanse of the Wyoming Territory, under a canopy of stars that had witnessed countless human dramas unfold across the untamed landscape, Della and Sam Eckhart had found in each other what many search for but few truly discover. Not just a refuge from the storms of life, but a partnership that made them stronger together than they could ever be apart. And as for the woman who had once been beaten for being barren, she had found a man who was proud to have her still exactly as she was, completely and perfectly enough.